Well, happy Hillside. I'm going to teach you a little bit about how to set up slack lines. First, let me show you different types of slack lines. The first slack line I'm going to show you is a 2-inch gibbon. This is the most common kind you're going to see. People use these frequently in parks. It's ratcheting, so it's got a ratchet, and it's very easy for tightening. They're very secure and very durable. It's the same type of material that you see on tow straps for cars and things like that. The second type of slack line I'm going to show you is a flow line, which is also made by Gibbon. This is a 1-inch, and it has 2 ratchets, one for both ends. And that's because this one needs to be tensioned down a little bit tighter. These ones are a little bit harder to use, but they're tons of fun. These are actually my very favorite type of slack line. The last type of slack line I'm going to show you is just plain old climbing webbing, stuff you can buy at Mountain Equipment Co-op or just about anywhere else. This can be fastened in lots of different ways, but I'm going to show you the most simple way to fasten it. We often call it a primitive setup, and it just uses 2 carabiners and a locking ring and 2 straps, one for either side of the slack line to wrap around trees. The last bit of kit that I'm going to show you are tree protectors. These ones are felt tree protectors that I've bought from Gibbon. These have had a lot of use. I find you really need a minimum of 4 of them because they're not long enough to go around most trees, so I actually connect 2 of them together to go around the trees, and you need 2 for each side. So I carry them with me wrapped up like this, and I'll show you how to use them. So first things first, we need to protect our tree. Here we have a nice tree, we got a little bit of ivy around it, we got some flowers. So what I do is I take my 2 lengths, because one won't be sufficient to get around this tree, and I Velcro them together like this. Then I've got myself a nice big long piece of tree protection. And then what I do is I put this around, and I just wrap it at the height that I think that the slack line is going to be. And sometimes you have to jimmy it around a bit to make this work. But the key thing is that it's not going to move. And you can see that that's going to protect the bark. I've used this tree for years and I've never had any problems with the ivy or with the bark. So that's the most important step number 1. If I'm using the 2-inch slack line, the 2-inch has got 2 mount points. The first one is the ratchet, and you can see that the ratchet's got a loop on one end and the actual ratchet itself. The way that this works is you chuck it around the tree like so, and then I just push the ratchet through here, and I give it a bit of a tug, making sure that everything is onto the tree protection. And what I like to do is I want to eyeball it and make sure that this point right here is pointing directly towards my other tree or my other mount point. And as best you can, you dress this so that the slack line is not going to be twisted. It's going to be nice and flat so that it's not pulling it in any direction. The other side of the slack line is much the same. The ratchet would be attached to another tree. This one has a loop on the other end as well, and then the entire length of the line. You take this end and you wrap it around the tree like so, pull it around, and then if you've got 25 meters of slackline, you could pull it all through. That takes a lot of time. My recommendation is you have it all looped up like this, you grab it through the loop, and you pull it all through at once. Chuck it, and then you just dress this here so that it's nice. And what I do is I kind of fold it a bit so that it comes out nice and straight like that. Now actually using the ratchet's quite simple. You take the end of the slack line and you can see the little gap through right here. You feed it through, and this is where I see a lot of people do this wrong. They feed it through until they feel like they're kind of done with it, and then they start tightening with using the ratchet. What you want to do is you want to pull more. Pull as hard as you can. Get this as tight as it can possibly go using your body's strength. I can lean on this and I can pull on this bottom one with all of my weight, and it's not going to go anymore. Then when I come do that, I come back to the ratchet, use my thumb lever to get this out, and then I can actually start pulling. And you can see is happening is it's twisting the 2 ends of this to the point where it's getting quite tight. And it'll get to the point where you can not physically pull it much more. And that's when you know that it's getting pretty good. And you pull that thumb lever and you put it into locking position. Then you get up on the line, you bounce a bit, and that bouncing loosens it up, and then you start to know whether you need to come back and give it a bit more tightening. once you've got your tree protection in place, you want to put up some type of an anchor point. So I use a piece of climbing webbing like this. I can just take my carabiner, slide it through the two ends, and you've got a good location from which you can attach your slackline. Alternatively, if you've got a little bit of extra webbing, you can wrap it around the tree second time, put your carabiner across both of them. This makes it a little bit closer to the tree and gives you a little bit more space for your slackline to go. For the end where you don't need to tighten down, you can just use the loop on the end of your slackline that you can just tie, run it around a tree or whatever your secure anchor point is, take your slackline, run it through like this, and then pull it tight. To attach the end, just take your slackline, make sure that it's nice and flat, not twisted all the way back to your mount point, and then take your locking ring that you've got and put a loop of line through it like this, and then run it back underneath and through like this, so that you get a spot like that that you can put a carabiner through. So right there is where you're going to put your carabiner. So you grab that, you run it through the hole, flip it around, and that's nice and tight. From there, you can take your loose end and run it over to your carabiner that you've already anchored to the tree, and this side goes up through the carabiner. This is important. Up through the carabiner, pull it back nice and straight. This side goes down to the carabiner, and then you do it again. You bring it over to the far side, bring it up through the carabiner, but here you're going to now tuck it under your first line. So the second line that you brought up through it, you slide it underneath, and you bring it back one more time, and you bring it down through the carabiner here, and once again tuck it underneath. So you've got 2 points of friction, one on both sides, and then you pull the loose end just like this, and then you give it enough tension that you're able to stand on it. And that's a primitive setup. That's all there is to it. Haha, you might say, but what if you don't have a tree? All is not lost. You can do a setup kind of like this. You can see the slackline. The other end in the shadows back there is attached to a tree, but I only have one tree. So what I've done is I've augured into the ground some big party tent pegs, and I've attached them with a piece of strapping right here. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, 3, and each one of those tent pegs looks like this thing. Nice, big and long. It's got an augering end. You can get these on Amazon or from Home Depot. These rock. Keep it close to a fence or some line and it's not going to get too affected by lawnmowers. And then you just attach your slackline to it. And if you have an A-frame or any type of strong piece of wood that you can angle up, that's all you need to bring it up off the ground. I've used a couple pieces of wood, 2x4 on the bottom, and I have attached my flow line to it. It allows for a nice, long, steady base, and it tends not to move, even with lateral movements from side to side. Oh, what about people who don't have a yard? Or those who don't want to be observed by their pesky, nosy neighbors, or you just don't like people? Inside, you can also set up a slackline. So if you have a basement where you can have access to a concrete floor, or if you have access to some type of a nice strong beam behind a door jamb, you can attach a lag eye screw, and there you can attach it to your slackline. Raise it up with some type of piece of wood like this. I use plywood, and it's sufficient. And on the other side, I don't attach it to the wall, I actually attach it down to the floor. And down here, you can see that there's an expanding concrete bolt that goes down about 3 inches into the concrete floor underneath this carpet. And I just do my same primitive setup that I showed you that I do outside. And if you're not too tall, this works extremely well. This bounces down to the ground, and it's a great way to slackline in the wintertime. All right, Hillside community, I hope that was useful. Remember that the slack lines that I've shown you are intended to be set up low to the ground. If you're doing something more crazy like high lines, use a different type of setup. The types of setups that I've shown you probably aren't safe in that context. I wish I could see you all. I'm looking forward to next year when we can meet in person. But until then, have a wonderful year, have a happy Hillside, and enjoy the rest of your virtual experience.